Our first item of business is consideration of motion S6M 17314 in the name of Tess White, that the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee recommends that the Parliament remove Maggie Chapman from office as a member of the committee. I refer members to paper 1 and invite Tess White to speak to and to move her motion. Tess White, please.
Thank you, Convener. Convener and members, my motion today under Rule 6.3 of the Standing Orders calls for the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee to recommend that the Parliament remove Maggie Chapman from office as a member of the committee. It follows Maggie Chapman's public comments in Aberdeen on the 20th of April 2025 relating to the Supreme Court judgment in For Women Scotland versus the Scottish Ministers. Maggie Chapman said, and I quote, "And we say not in our name to the bigotry, prejudice and hatred that we see coming from the Supreme Court and from so many other institutions." And she added, "Not in our name, never in our name." Her outburst was shocking and totally unjustified attack on the rule of law. Her comments about the Supreme Court weren't just rabble-rousing, they were dangerous and incendiary. Maggie Chapman has been Deputy Convener of this committee since June 2021. Our remit as a committee includes civil justice. She is not a private individual, she is a legislator. And as Deputy Convener of the Equalities Committee, there is a high bar for conduct. Words matter, tone matters. There must be boundaries around behaviour and rhetoric. Section 1 of the Judiciary and Courts Scotland Act 2008 is clear. Members of the Scottish Parliament must uphold the continued independence of the judiciary. The Faculty of Advocates has written to the committee, not only restating this legal imperative, but highlighting the risk of danger to the members of the Supreme Court created by Maggie Chapman's comments. The faculty was unequivocal in its criticism of Miss Chapman. Its correspondence to the committee said her comments were, and I quote, "beyond the pale," and that her behaviour was irresponsible and reprehensible. It added that her comments failed to respect the rule of law and constitute an egregious breach of Miss Chapman's duties to uphold the continued independence of the judiciary. It's worth noting that the correspondence came from the office bearers of the faculty, and that includes Ruth Crawford KC, Treasurer of the faculty, who acted for the Scottish Government in the case in question. The faculty called on Maggie Chapman to apologise, but no apology has been forthcoming. Instead, Miss Chapman has doubled down on her remarks and refused to reflect on her position. She is devoid of remorse. And in doing so, her position as Deputy Convener and member of this committee is clearly untenable. Let me be clear that the Supreme Court's ruling on the 16th of April was about correctly interpreting the law as it stands. Page 2 of the judgment states as much. The Supreme Court was not making policy, but answering a question about statutory interpretation. As legal academic Scott Wortley at the University of Edinburgh said, judgments can be legitimately subjected to criticism. No one's saying, committee, that you can't disagree with a legal outcome or point to the potential consequences of that outcome. No one's saying that. But in doing so, Scott Wortley adds that any legitimate criticism should be made while respecting the independence of the judiciary and the importance of upholding the law. Maggie Chapman's emotive remarks did not meet that test. The judiciary cannot defend itself publicly, but she used words like prejudice and hatred, which suggests animus on the part of the Supreme Court judges. And in doing so, she attacked the judges' perceived motivations rather than critique the substance of the ruling. That's why her comments are so deeply disturbing, and why Maggie Chapman has failed to discharge her duties as Deputy Convener of the Equality Committee. Words matter, especially when they're weaponised. Rather than take the heat out of the situation, Maggie Chapman doused it in petrol. As a committee dealing with civil justice, we now have a Deputy Convener who has publicly claimed that Scotland's apex court is bigoted and prejudiced. How can anyone working in the civil justice system have confidence in the committee following her remarks? The SNP First Minister has said Maggie Chapman's comments were wrong. The Scottish Labour leader has said, when we get into the place of attacking the judiciary, I think that takes us down a very, very dangerous route. MSPs of all persuasions have a duty to respect the rule of law, no matter what they feel about a particular verdict. Think of the precedent this will set if Maggie Chapman's comments go without challenge or consequence. And finally, Convener and Committee, I urge my fellow MSPs to do the right thing today and back my call to recommend that Maggie Chapman be removed from her position as a member and Deputy Convener of this committee. I move the motion.
Thank you. I now invite any other member who wishes to speak to indicate now, and I will bring you in. I have Maggie Chapman, please.
Thank you, Convener. I want to begin my contribution by expressing my solidarity with trans and non-binary people across Scotland. I have spoken to many over the past weeks and months, and they consistently say the same thing. They feel under attack. They feel that they've been cast as a group, as a threat to others when we know they are not, and they just want to live their lives as who they are, like any of us. I am very grateful to the many people, trans and cis, who have been in touch with me over the last nearly 2 weeks to tell me their stories. It's been devastating to hear about the exclusion and prejudice they or loved ones have faced, and how worried they are for the future. Some have just been in touch to thank me for standing up for them in this cruelest of culture wars. Because that is what's happening. Trans and non-binary people are having their lives weaponised in absolutely dreadful ways. And for the first time in a long time, human rights appear to be going backwards. And we are already seeing implications for women too, with challenges to our bodily autonomy, abortion rights, and our right to exist as we wish, not according to socially imposed views of femininity or beauty. The Good Law Project and others have produced detailed analysis of how the EHRC's interim statement produced on Friday evening, and indeed the Supreme Court ruling, raise questions about compliance with our obligations under international human rights law. But I won't go into that in detail now. I know we'll spend time discussing this in due course. This debate is about what I said in response to the Supreme Court ruling. I have never questioned the court's right to make the ruling that it did, but that does not mean that I must agree with it. I don't, and I am very concerned about the impact it will have and is already having. Trans and non-binary people just want to be able to live their lives like any of us without the fear of prejudice or violence. But now they are concerned about how their lives and rights will be affected. I have and will always stand up and advocate for trans and non-binary people, not just because it is the right thing to do, but because it is also my job to stand up for my constituents. Some of all of our constituents, or all of us have constituents who are trans or non-binary. Others of our constituents have trans or non-binary children, parents, siblings, friends. They deserve representation as who they are. I will not stop being a vocal trans ally. That is what I was doing in Aberdeen nearly 10 days ago, as I had done in Dundee the day before, and as I've done on our streets and in our parliament many times over the years. Thousands of LGBTQIA+ people and their allies gathered on our streets after the Supreme Court verdict because they were angry, afraid, and uncertain of what lies ahead for them and their loved ones. And we know our courts reflect our society. We've probably all criticised court judgments in the past, when racist or homophobic laws were upheld, when women didn't get justice for the abuse and violence they'd faced, when coal miners were convicted of offences during the miners' strike of the 1980s. Indeed, this very Parliament pardoned all those convicted with the Miners' Strike Pardon Scotland Act just a couple of years ago. That's not to say that the courts did not have the constitutional right to make those judgments. Of course they did. But we would surely all hope that if those rulings were to be made today, they would have been made differently. This ruling did not happen in a vacuum. It happened with a backdrop of a culture war that has seen trans people and their loved ones being targeted and demonised by too many politicians and large parts of the media. But as politicians, we must use our voices to speak out when we see rights being removed or injustices faced by anyone, perhaps especially when minoritised communities are threatened by societal prejudice. We not only have the right of freedom of expression to speak out, I believe we have the obligation to speak out. I do not expect all MSPs on this committee to agree with my views on the ruling or about trans rights more generally, but I hope you will uphold my right to them. This is what was put forward by Lord David Hope, who served as the Lord President of the Court of Session and First Deputy President of the Supreme Court. Lord Hope, not a Scottish Green Party member, said of me, and I quote, "I do not think that she should stand down or be removed from her post, but she should be more careful with her language." End quote. I'll let you be the judge of that. But this really isn't about me. It's about what message our Parliament sends and what we do for people who feel under attack and who are worried about what the future holds. Finally, I'm sorry I'm not with you in person, but I'm at the STUC Annual Congress in Dundee. Congress opened yesterday with a clear statement of welcome to and inclusion of trans people. The General Secretary, Ros Foyer, has expressed her grave concerns about the impacts and effects on trans and non-binary people of the Supreme Court ruling. And trade unionists from across the country spoke passionately in support of trans and non-binary people, expressing solidarity in the face of the onslaught they face. I am proud to be a trade unionist, just as I am proud to be a trans ally. Thank you.
Thank you. I note that Pam Gossel has indicated to come in. Pam Gossel, please.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to thank my colleague Tess White for bringing forward this motion, which recommends that the Parliament remove Maggie Chapman, MSP, from office as a member of this committee. I would like to put on record that I agree with the points that Tess White has made and that I will be voting for this motion. As parliamentarians, it is our duty to set an example for the people of Scotland. After all, our constituents chose us to be their voice and represent their interests in the Scottish Parliament. Unfortunately, the shocking behaviour we witnessed on the 20th April from Maggie Chapman MSP shows that she is not fit for this role. Maggie Chapman MSP and Deputy Convener of the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee said with regards to the UK Supreme Court judgment on the definition of the word woman, "We say not in our name to the bigotry, prejudice and hatred that we see coming from the Supreme Court. This is shocking behaviour that is not appropriate for a member of this Parliament, let alone for the Deputy Convener of this committee."
And consider what people have said this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Tess White to wind up and indicate if she wishes to press or withdraw her motion.
Thank you, Convener. May I give Maggie Chapman one final opportunity to show remorse and apologise for the accusations that she made?
Tess White, if you'd like to sum up and then press or withdraw your motion.
Can I just check? I'd like to ask Maggie Chapman if she's going to apologise just one final time before I move to close.
Convener, if you want me to come in.
Maggie Chapman, are you Are you satisfied that you have said what you needed to say, or do you wish to come in and take the invite from Tess White to speak?
I've said what I wish to say.
Okay, thank you. Continue.
Thank you, Convener. I've heard what the members have said today, and I thank Paul O'Kane for the words and actually stating that we do have a solemn duty to respect the rule of law. If I go back to what Marie McNair, MSP, has said, I do respectfully disagree that we can represent the voice of our constituents, but to do it in this manner and to weaponise language like this and make it a direct attack, I think is a dangerous precedent to say that parliamentarians can act in one way in the committee and in the chamber, but basically the rules don't apply when we're in the constituency and being the voices of our constituents. And I would actually push back and say, is that the SNP position? Because I would ask the SNP to reconsider that, because it's setting a very dangerous precedent. So I go back to, I'd just like to say one point of substance, and then I will go and in summary. There are protections under the 2010 Act for the protected characteristics of gender reassignment. And I think it's very important to say that. In her remarks this morning, Maggie Chapman didn't engage at all with the statutory duties as an MSP. And she didn't engage at all in the premise that as deputy convener of this committee under the 2008 Act, she does have responsibilities, particularly when this committee is overseeing civil justice. What we've seen this morning, convener and committee, is absolutely not a jot of self-awareness. There's no self-reflection at all, which in itself is dangerous. This isn't about freedom of expression. This is about the words that she used to attack the Supreme Court. She's weaponised language and the verdict rather than engaging in the substance of the verdict. No one is questioning her right to critique, but she's violated very important boundaries and disregarded the rule of law. The Supreme Court was clear that trans people are protected under the Equality Act 2010. But today we've seen no apology from Maggie Chapman and no remorse. And therefore, I urge this committee to support my motion that her position on this committee remains untenable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will now put the question to the committee. The question is that motion S6M 17314 in the name of Tess White be agreed. Are we all agreed? No. No, we are not agreed, so there will be a division. Those in favour, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. Those against the motion, please raise your hands. Evelyn, can we please see you on the screen, raising your hand? Thank you. Okay, thank you. And are there any abstentions? Okay, the result of the division on motion S6M 17314 in the name of Tess White is 3-4, 4 against. Therefore, the motion is not agreed. I am now suspending the meeting for 5 minutes to allow us to bring our witnesses